A lot of debris all over the place, obviously. Chairs, we even saw airplane chairs, you know, over the place. That was
Really?
unusual, yes. Glass buildings 7, 8 blocks away, smashed. You know, it's devastation, completely.
And have you seen any bodies?
Not yet, we haven't. We're waiting for everybody else, wait for a coordination to get together, all the federal authorities, also state authorities, and then we'll join a team then.
And what's your role?
I am actually, we are tunnelers, really. We will go through the debris, small cracks, where, you know, anything what we can do.
Why do you do this?
It's what we do.
You've worked lots of things, nothing comparable to this, naturally.
No, nothing. I've never experienced something like this before.
How long do you think this is going to take to go through?
A long time. A long time. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done.
Thank you very much for speaking with us. We'll be in touch again.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Back to the New York Bureau and Tim Cavanaugh, who works about a quarter-mile away from the World Trade Center. As we understand it, Tim, you were on the phone?
Actually, my friend's brother was on the line with him, and they got cut off immediately. And then I was on a conversation with his brother, and he told me that his brother had heard the first crash, and he was informing his brother of what had happened. And then all of a sudden the phone got cut off from him, and that was the last he's heard of his brother since. I brought his picture so that maybe if there's someone out there who can see him, who has seen him, or if he's in a hospital somewhere, maybe someone can call and let him.
Can we see it?
Sure.
Where's the picture?
It's right here on my hand.
Want to hold it up? Okay, so we get a close-up of this. And he worked in the building?
He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 102nd floor. It's a guy I coach football with. I've known him my whole life. He's a great man.
You are probably resorting to prayer.
Actually, I walked from my office, which is a quarter-mile away, and it was desolate. It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off, and there were ashes, like, in the street, like about 1 foot to 6 inches of ashes, if you could imagine that, walking down the street. And I walked over to Our Lady of Victory Church, which is right down the street from Wall Street. And Wall Street, usually they have the barricades there, and there was nothing. It was gone. And you know, I picked up a piece of paper, and I saw the paper and read it, and it was from the 106th floor of the World Trade Center, and I just knew that it was, you know, you couldn't imagine it. It was like being in downtown Beirut in America.
Good grief. And on the scene is Rose Arce. Rose is a CNN producer in New York, a veteran CNN producer, and a very capable CNN producer. Where were you when this happened this morning, Rose? I can't hear Rose. Okay. I'm sorry, Rose. Okay. We'll have to check back with you, Rose. We're having difficulty. Let's go to Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Jamie, first, we've heard the briefings earlier. What kind of shape is that building in?
Pretty bad shape, Larry. It's nearly 12 hours after this plane slammed into the side of the Pentagon. The building is still burning. The firefighters say they have the blaze contained in an area, but it's still not under control. In fact, if you look right behind my head, you can see some flames licking out of the roof there. That's part of the firefighting technique of trying to cut the roof open and let the fire burn through in order to put this out. Nevertheless, the Pentagon is vowing, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and President Bush both saying that the building will open for business as usual tomorrow. That may be possible if they just open the other side of the building, where, of course, the Secretary's office is, the Pentagon briefing room, the National Military Command Center, all on the other side of the building. You know, in some ways, there was a little bit of luck in today's incident in that this part of the building was under renovation. That meant that some of the new space that had just been renovated was not yet occupied, and it also had improved fire retardant capabilities. And on the old side, over basically in this direction, that part of the building, people had just moved out to get ready for the next phase of renovation, so there weren't nearly as many people as might have been in the building at that time of day. Nevertheless, Pentagon officials expect the death toll to be high, but they are not saying publicly what they think that death toll will be. Larry?
And Jamie, have you been able at all to see the aircraft?
Well, you know, earlier today I got right up next to the building and I took a look at some of the pieces that were outside. There were only very small pieces of that American Airlines jetliner. A cockpit that was all, a window that was all smashed, part of the fuselage that was bent and twisted. But most of the parts of the plane are still inside the building, according to people who've been in and seen it.
Thank you, Jamie. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. We have a panel of senators joining us, and before we check with them, here is just a moment of what the statement made tonight by President George Bush at the White House. Watch.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
We'll be hearing in a while from a terrorist expert, an aviation expert. We'll also be hearing from the former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, and we'll be checking with others. But right now, a panel of 4 distinguished senators have joined us in Washington. They are Senator John Warner, Republican of Virginia, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. Senator John Kerry, Democrat of Massachusetts, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, including the Subcommittee on International Operations and Terrorism. Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, member of the Select Intelligence Committee. She's chairing the Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Technology, Terrorism, and Government Information. And Senator Fred Thompson, Republican of Tennessee, a member of the Select Intelligence Committee, a ranking member of Governmental Affairs. We'll start with Senator Warner. Was this a failure of information techniques tonight and today, Senator?
Well, Larry, I spent much of the afternoon with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and indeed had an opportunity to talk with the President from the Pentagon. That we assess tomorrow. Tonight, we grieve for those who've lost their lives, the wounded, their families, and we look upon this as the greatest tragedy in the history of our country, but also one of its finest hours, when we've seen this country come together like never before, whether it's the firemen or the rescue operators or the military all over the world, and we stand with one voice being spoken by our President, and he did very well tonight.
Senator Kerry, did your Committee on International Operations and Terrorism ever actually fear something like this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But let me join John, and I know all my colleagues, in just expressing, I mean, I think all of us here in Washington are feeling in very personal ways the loss of what's happened here. I know that I had one friend I know of already on that plane from Boston, and I dread the learning of perhaps others, but for thousands of families tonight, there is just a huge loss, and I think in every American, there's a sense of, there's a fury, an intense burning fury about this, and a determination to do what is right about it. We have always known this could happen. We've warned about it, we've talked about it. I regret to say, I served on the Intelligence Committee up until last year. I can remember after the bombings of the embassies, after TWA 800, we went through this flurry of activity talking about it, but not really doing the hard work of responding. We need to do that now, and I'm confident that the size of this, the nature of this loss, and the nature of this attack are going to motivate everybody to come together to do that. And I think that's imperative. And we also, I think, Larry, I was heartened by the President's comments tonight, need to make certain that those countries that sponsor terrorism, that support it, that harbor these fugitives, are as much a part of the problem as those who engage in the terrorist act themselves. And we need to make certain as a country we respond to that boldly and bravely, and not recklessly, but boldly.
Senator Feinstein, what are the next few days going to be like? there's going to be opinions from, what's your read on what's next?
Oh, I think there are many of us that feel that this was an act of war against the United States, that its loss is our human loss is going to be extreme, that the deviltry, the cunning, and the evil behind the act is extraordinary, and that we need to respond, and that America needs to come together with a unity and a purpose and respond. We cannot be a paper tiger. This act, in my view, it wasn't coincidence now that the World Trade Center has been the victim twice. And I think it's a symbol of America, and it's a symbol of what we want to protect as well. And so I think tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the leadership has announced that there will be a resolution on the floor of the Senate. For many of us, and I'm one that believes very strongly that rather than arguing over missile defense, the asymmetric threat against the United States is the most serious one. And we've had a good indication of that today.
Senator Thompson, President John F. Kennedy once said, when asked about his own safety, if someone is willing to give up their own life, that is almost impossible to protect against. What do you do when you have people like today, obviously in numbers more than 10 of the total 4 planes, who died for this? How do you counter that?
It's very difficult. I think there'll always be a window of vulnerability that we'll have. We're living in a different world now. I think we let our defenses down a bit after the Cold War and wanted to enjoy the peace dividend. But the fact of the matter is the world's a more dangerous place in many respects than it has been in times past. We're now seeing the other side of the technology coin. Technology has been a wonderful thing for us, but it also allows bad people to do bad things that they couldn't do a short time ago. We saw one form of that today, probably in the communications area. There are several other threats out there, though. The missile threat is one of them. It is real. The cyber terrorism that could shut down our computers and our communication networks and our transportation system and all that is very real. We simply have to get about implementing the policies, appropriating the funds necessary to address these across the board.
Senator Warner, what do you say to Americans in their grief about what they should do? You try not to let terrorism affect you, but people are not going to go easily to airports tomorrow. What do you say to them?
Have faith in this great country. We've survived, although this is the worst, we've survived other crises. I see tonight in Washington among my colleagues, we're no longer Democrat, Republican. We're united as a Congress behind our president, and we're going to take every step. Number one, to find out what happened and see that it cannot be repeated. And secondly, we're a nation under the rule of law, but we will relentlessly pursue and hold accountable those who perpetrated this crime against our citizens.
And when we pursue that, Senator Kerry, does America as a nation pursue it legally? Does it go through world courts, or does it take off?
There are 3 ways to pursue it, Larry. One is multilaterally, which takes more time. That's the way George Bush, the father, did it in the Gulf War. You can do it bilaterally. You and another nation, you could reach an agreement, you can work together, and you can do it unilaterally when the circumstances call for it. I personally believe this is a circumstance because of the nature of it. As Diane said, as many have said today, this is an act of war. The difficulty is, unlike Pearl Harbor, this is a stealth enemy. Japan was identifiable. We knew where to find them ultimately, you know, and after chasing around, and we could identify. Here, we know pretty much. I mean, there's a great certainty among many people about where the fingers point. But ultimately, we don't want to be a terrorist ourselves. We have to do what we do with the knowledge and the certainty that we can determine, but we must be prepared, absolutely, to move unilaterally if we need to protect the honor and the civility that we stand for. And I think that everybody in this country would support that based on the proper response with the proper information.
Senator Feinstein, what if? What if it's bin Laden? Well, if it is bin Laden, what do you do? You go into Afghanistan, you look for him, you bomb, what do you do?
I don't think America can be a paper tiger in this instance. This was a major attack, and let's face it, there isn't going to be chaos. We're not going to bend down. We are going to rise up as one people. And it's got to be stopped, and you have to ferret it out. I agree with what Dick Holbrooke said on this network earlier. You've got to work with our allies, the NATO allies, particularly Russia, China, and the moderate Arab countries. That's Egypt, that's Jordan, that's the Saudis. And we have to make a statement that is so strong that any country that harbors, that trains, that gives money to, that supports, becomes an enemy of the civilized world. Because if this can happen here, it can happen in other places. Terrorism, as our report will say very shortly, isn't a crisis, it's an ongoing condition. And we've got to change the condition. So I must say, I feel very strongly about this, that the United States must respond. Those of us that have had the classified briefings over a period of time understand some of the networks that are functioning out there, even in this country, as a matter of fact. And it's not too difficult to put together 2 and 2, and I think get 4.
All right.
Larry,
Senator Thompson?
Can I just say that Putin was one of the first heads of state to call our president. And the Secretary of Defense this afternoon, colleagues, I was there when he talked with the Russian defense minister. That's an example of the type of support we're getting. The world has got to come and help us solve this problem, because terrorism is a common enemy to all of us.
And Senator Thompson, if the state that harbors them is as responsible as those who commit it, therefore are those civilians in peril?
Yes, they are. The powers that be in those nations have put them in peril. Saddam uses his civilians, as we know. There's no way around that, but we've got to face up to it. I agree with Diane that the greatest deterrent that we can have is the knowledge in the minds of potential terrorists around the world that there will be swift, accurate retribution. Unfortunately, there's just no way around that.
And Larry, could I just
Thank you. We're out of time, but we'll do a lot more with you in the nights ahead with all 4 of you and others. Secretary William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense, will be joining us. As we go to meet him, there was an extraordinary scene on the Capitol steps tonight. Look at what happened. Watch.
As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow.
September 11th, 2001. That date will inject our brains. Joining us from Washington is former Senator, former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. Were you shocked, or was there an expectancy of something like this?
Well, I, like every American, every person watching this the world over, was shocked to see the act of terror actually being perpetrated on the screen, and the horror that we all witnessed. Was I surprised? The answer is no. We have known for some time that Osama bin Laden and other organizations have targeted the United States abroad and at home. We formed the so-called Hart-Rudman Commission several years ago, and they filed 3 reports, the last of which was quite prophetic, indicating that we should anticipate acts of terrorism on American soil by terrorists who may in fact use weapons of mass destruction and engage in nearly simultaneous types of multiple attacks. And so it doesn't come as a surprise. It comes as a surprise or shock to see the horror that we have witnessed today. But we have got to take more measures. I agree with much of what has been stated this evening, but we also have to take care that we don't engage in the wholesale slaughter of innocents abroad. We have to go after those groups and those who support those groups in terms of our responses.
So we don't go in and bombs away. What do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure we have the right information. And we don't want to prejudge the matter, although those footprints of guilt would seem to lead in one very certain direction. I think we go to those who are harboring the suspected groups and serve them notice. I think President Bush did that very forcefully tonight, and that they must produce those individuals, and certainly they will face a number of consequences, and I don't think we have to spell them out. There will be certainly diplomatic, economic, and perhaps even military action, but we should await for the President and his national security team to deliver that particular message.
You worked there for a long time. Were you a little surprised that the Pentagon wasn't better protected?
Well, the Pentagon, as you note from its proximity to the airport, really cannot be better protected in terms of aircraft flying near the airport and passing over the Pentagon itself. It's been one of my worst nightmares over the years to be out on the parade ground or in my office and know that at any time a plane could, through either accidentally or be directed into the Pentagon itself. There is virtually no way that one can protect the Pentagon against that type of attack unless you banned all flights going into National itself, but even that might not be sufficient. So it's almost impossible to protect against an airplane engaging that type of activity.
What do we do about a bin Laden? We've heard the name, we've seen him occasionally. He's obviously been involved in acts of terrorism over the year, but what do you do about someone like this?
I think the first thing that we should resist doing, and that is focusing solely on him. To the extent that he is responsible, he will be held accountable and he will receive just punishment. But there may be other bin Ladens out there, and there'll be more following. What we have to do is to eliminate the climate under which they're allowed to train, to be funded, and to perpetrate these acts. Senator Warner talked about President Putin calling President Bush today. I was in Moscow a year ago when one of the bombs went off, destroying one of their buildings. I went on national television pledging the United States to work hand in hand with the Russian people because they were being terrorized. And so this is an international problem. We have to gather our allies and say, this transcends all borders. When America is wounded, the rest of the world bleeds as well. And what happens here can have a dramatic impact on the life and the lifestyles of so many the world over. So we are in this together, and every American is in this together. Much like we came together after Pearl Harbor, we're coming together now, and we will respond as one nation.
And, Mr. Secretary, it must be asked, how did they get on these airplanes?
Well, that's to be determined. Obviously, they were able to slip through the security. They may have had inside assistance. You may have had a situation in which bin Laden or another group has been placing sleepers for a year or so or less. We don't know exactly, having assistance to allow them to get on. There are many ways in which that could have happened, but that's going to have to await the investigation itself by the FBI and others.
Thank you very much. Good friend. Always good seeing him. Not under these circumstances, though. William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense. In a moment, we're going to talk with Tim O'Brien, the CNN correspondent, close friend of the Olson family, as was this program. Barbara Olson passed away today on American Air Flight 77. Brian Jenkins with us in Los Angeles, the terrorism expert. And Arthur Woke, the famed attorney who has done a lot of work involving aviation and who is, we understand, an angry man tonight. Before we check in with Tim and Brian and Arthur, tonight on the Capitol steps, the members of House and Senate gathered. Watch this. Ted Olson is the Solicitor General of the United States. You know him very well from the many, many appearances he made before the United States Supreme Court and the Florida Supreme Court in the question over the election of Bush over Gore. His wife was Barbara Olson, who appeared on this program so many times in the last 4 weeks, almost every night. Barbara Olson was on American Air Flight 77 that left Dulles, bound for Los Angeles, and crashed into the Pentagon. I spoke to Ted Olson today briefly, and it was just sad, So sad to speak to someone who had just lost his wife. Another gentleman who spoke to him was a much closer friend to the Olsen family. He's Tim O'Brien, CNN correspondent. He called Ted on the phone. We understand, Tim, that you were at their wedding.
I was in their wedding. I was also out at his house this afternoon along with a number of other friends. It was a very sad afternoon.
Now, I know he told us she called him, but he went into detail with you. What happened during that call? This is the only information we have on these terrorists.
She was able to call him twice. How she could pull that off, we don't know, but she did. The phone went dead the first time after a very brief conversation, maybe less than a minute, and she called him back. And she said to him, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Vintage Barbara, ready to take charge. She was in the back of the plane, huddled with other passengers, and we're told flight personnel and presumably the pilot. She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters. If they were armed with other weapons, such as machine guns or any kind of gun, you'd think she might have said that first, but she said no, knives and box cutters. I asked Ted, did she tell you how many people were there, how many hijackers were there? And Ted said no, but she referred to them in the plural, so there was more than one. What about nationality? Did you get any sense of that? No. Motives? No. They
were all in the back of the plane, right, Tim? The pilots and the passengers were herded to the back of the 757.
That's the understanding I get from Ted, correct.
So whoever took over that plane was up front, and one of them had to know how to fly it.
Presumably that's the case, yeah, but you know that's speculation and we don't know for sure. It's conceivable there was a co-pilot who still may have been in the cockpit. We don't know, but there were flight personnel and most of the passengers huddled in the back. Incidentally, Barbara was not supposed to be on that flight today. Her original plan was to fly to California yesterday. Today is Ted Olson's birthday, and she wanted to be with him last night, and so that was the cost.
And when she was on the phone, Ted had already known about the crashes in New York, right?
That is correct, and he did tell her about that, so she had a good idea of what she was up against. She knew about the 2 crashes at the World Trade Center.
Tim, you stay with us. Brian Jenkins, you're an expert on terrorism. You've been involved in things like this for a long time, but nothing compared to this. Were you shocked?
Shocked, but not surprised.
Not surprised?
Not surprised, no. The possibility of a large-scale terrorist attack on this country is something that we have anticipated for a long time. There have been previous incidents involving multiple coordinated attacks. We have dealt with previous situations where it was either threatened or certainly a concern of the authorities that a hijacked aircraft would be crashed into into the middle of a city.
But from what Miss Olsen described them as having, how did they get on the plane with that?
Well, it depends. I mean, that's difficult to say, and we don't know. I mean, people do board aircraft with all sorts of small things.
And get on?
And potentially get on. I suspect that's going to change now, but I mean, people board aircraft with small penknives. They board aircraft with various kinds of metal objects. It does, however, raise some questions about how they were able to get on the aircraft and take control of the cockpit. This is not a standard hijacking where somebody seizes a passenger hostage and orders a pilot to fly to another city.
And in fact, in 3 of the 4 operations, they succeeded.
They did succeed.
The one that went down in Pennsylvania was obviously heading for Washington, is that correct? Something must have happened.
That's a safe presumption.
Arthur Woke, you're an expert at aviation accidents. You've been involved in the courts often dealing with this, and we understand you're quite angry at this. Why?
Well, because to me, it's disgusting to hear the platitudes of the politicians inside the Beltway saying that the government is in charge. I thought the government was in charge this morning. Where was the government yesterday, 5 months ago? Or a year ago when this was unfolding? Where were the national security agencies that are supposed to protect us from this? Where are our allies who are supposed to be part of this anti-terrorist network? Why are there no sky marshals on aircraft anymore? Was that a budgetary consideration of the FAA? Maybe that could have stopped it. So what bothers me, Larry, is that we're talking about burying what may be 25,000 people. There weren't supposed to be any more Pearl Harbors. We put in place a system to prevent this from happening. This was not a minimal terrorist act. This was something that required the cooperation of many, many people. And I don't understand, and I'm sure many of our viewers don't understand, how this could possibly happen. Where was the government?
All right, before I have Brian respond, Tim O'Brien, I know you're a reporter, so you're going to be objective about this. Does Mr. Woke have a point?
I think he does have a point. How much of a point depends on perhaps where you sit. Certainly there are some security breaches here. One of your guests pointed out that we haven't had a terrorist hijacking in 10 years, and maybe we have gotten a little lax. But we also have to recognize when people are willing to give up their lives to stage something like this, it's going to be very hard to stop under any circumstances.
And Brian, what do you make of what Arthur said? I mean, obviously, there was a failure today.
There clearly was a failure, no question about it. We have to determine what happened with regard to intelligence, what happened with regard to security. But at the same time, we have to realize that there is an ongoing war, that there's a constant flow of information, threats, warnings, information passed on by intelligence agents. And many times, by evacuating an embassy, by issuing an alert, by raising the level of security, these attacks are thwarted. Those victories are invisible because you can't count things that don't occur.
So we could have averted 14 things last month. We didn't know about it.
It is entirely possible. What we do see, and certainly saw dramatically today, are the failures. When the intelligence fails, when the security fails, that's what we were faced with today. Can we get better on security? Yes. Can we provide absolute security? Absolutely not.
Arthur, you know, as I quoted earlier, if someone wants to give up their life, that's awful hard to contain, isn't it?
Larry, I think I agree with that. I think that we are supposed to have a system in place to prevent this from happening. And you can't stop terrorism at the gate at the airport. You stop terrorists before they enter the country. You stop them by investigating their cells when they're in the country. You avoid this by exercising as much security operations as you possibly can. I'm no expert in security. I'm just a guy who saw it on CNN Live today. And all I can tell you is that there weren't supposed to be any of these in this country, and the people who are supposed to have been in charge were asleep at the switch, in my opinion.
And also, since you're an expert on pilots and things, were you surprised that whoever did this was able to commandeer these aircraft?
Not
able
really.
To fly them?
Not really. Remember, we have no sky marshals on the aircraft, so we have no one armed on aircraft randomly to prevent this from happening. The door that separates the cockpit from the rest of the airplane is really just a symbol of security. It's not real security. And finally, it doesn't take someone who's a rocket scientist to fly an airplane once it's airborne and to fly it into a building. So you don't have to be a sophisticated pilot to accomplish this, sadly.
All right, let's do what we haven't done yet today, and since this is a special edition of Larry King Live, and we'll be doing this, of course, throughout the week in CNN 24 hours a day, let's include the audience. Knoxville, Tennessee, hello.
Yes, sir, Mr. King. I was wondering what you and the panel thought about the possibility of the United States Army shooting down the plane over Pennsylvania. I know the Pentagon has denied it, but if they knew that plane was heading for D.C., is it possible that they did? And if they didn't, would they have later if it had gotten farther?
Yeah, Tim, this is supposing. A plane's heading in. It's got passengers. It's going to go to the White House or to Camp David. Do you shoot it down?
If there's that threat, you may have to, but certainly there are steps that can be taken before that threat materializes. First, you try to make contact with that plane, find out where it's going. But if it appears headed for the White House or the Pentagon or the Capitol or Camp David, and it's off route, that may be the only alternative you have, and it would make sense.
You agree, Brian?
In some cases, yes. The reality, however, in terms of major urban areas, airports are located in urban areas. Planes take off. It's not a long flight from Dulles to the Pentagon. It's not a long flight from some of the airports in the northeastern part of the United States to New York.
How about the caller, though? You've got a plane, you know it's diverted. It's obviously not going to San Francisco.
That certainly is one of those horrible decisions that someday, I suppose, someone is going to have to make.
St. Louis, hello.
Hello. My question is, we seem to have become very complacent and we're being very sophisticated and very rational about how to respond to this. However, on all of the channels, and especially on CNN, which, by the way, I think has done a fabulous job, Osama bin Laden seems to be the prime suspect here. We've heard his name for years, and he continued to operate. And my question is, he supposedly 3 weeks ago gave notice that this was going to happen. Where was everyone? Who dropped the ball? I know there's only so much you can do, and you said they might have averted 14 other incidents last month, but no one averted this incident.
Tim, was that a fact? Did we know that bin Laden had made some sort of threat 3 weeks ago?
There was knowledge that he made some kinds of threats, but they were general, and there was nothing new about that. He's making threats all the time. I think this may underscore the point made by Senator Feinstein earlier in the show, that it's not just an attack or a war that we must declare on individual terrorists, but rather on terrorism itself. Wherever it exists, the United States and other countries should be working to eradicate it, root and branch, or sooner or later it may strike home, as
Brian?
it did today.
I agree that Osama bin Laden certainly does make threats all the time. We can shut down the country. I mean, the number of threats coming in from Osama bin Laden, not just Osama bin Laden, but other organizations against the United States, is a continuing flow of information. There probably has not been a day in the last 10 years when there were not terrorist threats made against the United States somewhere in the world.
And Larry, that's just the point, you see. That's just the point. Terrorism didn't start yesterday. It didn't start last year. In fact, we both remember for the last 30 years or 40 years we've been talking about the seriousness of terrorism. It's really about time that we get our act together so that we don't wring our hands after the terrorist act has already occurred and people have lost their lives. We're supposed to be able to prevent this stuff. You know, they call it the 21st century threat. Well, it may be the 21st century threat, but we have the 21st century capability to deal with this threat. And obviously we're not
dealing with it. Are you saying, Arthur, every flight in America should have secret people on board watching the flight, that it should be treated as El Al treats every flight?
If that's what it takes, then that's what we have to do.
Indianapolis, hello.
Good evening, Larry.
Hi.
Like many Americans, I watched in horror from work today, all day long. My question, actually the question I was asked by my 13-year-old when she got home from school, is this going to change our entire way of living? Not in the sense of being afraid, but what about fuel prices? Today I went to work, gas was $1.62. I come out of work, it's $3 and $4 a gallon.
Really?
What about our economy?
Tim, what do you think the most stark changes will be?
I'm less worried about fuel prices than civil liberties, which may be sacrificed in the aftermath of this. And that may have to be the case. A great Supreme Court justice once said the Bill of Rights is not a suicide pact. We will have to take steps to protect ourselves, and some of those steps we may find repugnant today, but they may become necessary. I think that should be of concern to everybody.
Brian?
Well, the fact is that we've found in other places where terrorist campaigns have been waged, life does go on. Nonetheless,
but it changes, doesn't it?
It does change in a way where we will see probably...
Or do we get complacent?
If nothing happens for years and years, then inevitably we will get complacent again. However, this episode, the magnitude of this, is going to leave a deep scar on the psyche of the American people. Now, that can turn into the kind of resolve, the kind of determination that the previous guests have been talking about. But it also can make us, in some cases, a more callous, harder-edged people. We are where the United States probably was on now December 8th or 9th, 1941. This generation, which felt so safe, has never experienced anything like this. This is greater probably in casualties, I suspect, than the London Blitz.
And Arthur Walk, do you now want massive lines at airports? Do you want intensive security? Do you want people to get to the airport 3 hours before a flight?
No, on the contrary. I think that the system we have in place needs to be made better. I think we need sky marshals on aircraft, but I think the people who are responsible for our security, both domestically and internationally, have to get down to work. That's really the problem.
Tim O'Brien, we began this segment, and by the way, CNN, of course, will be on top of this 24 hours a day, and we'll have more special guests tomorrow night as well here on Larry King Live. But, Tim, I want to leave on Barbara. I understand Rudy Giuliani is in New York. Rudy?
It's essential, then obviously do it. The upper part of Manhattan will be open. But if tomorrow is a day in which you want to stay home and stay with your family and give comfort and support maybe to other people that have been affected by this, it would be a good day to do that. Yep. The point that Richie Shearer makes is people are wonderful, and I mean this in the best sense of the word. We've had thousands and thousands of people that have come to help us. When I was down at the site near the World Trade Center, I met a lot of the National Guard's people that the governor has sent, really wonderful young men and women. We have enough volunteers now. We have more volunteers, frankly, than we need at this point. And what we need to do is to focus the efforts of the professionals that are there in being able to do the recovery and try to save as many lives as we can and restore services as quickly as possible. We may be asking for more volunteers tomorrow and the next day and the day after, but right now we don't need any more volunteers.
Mr. Mayor, is there still hope that there are people who are still alive and well?
Yes, there's hope. There's hope that there are people that are still alive.
How is the rescue effort hampered by the darkness? What do you
we moved a lot of lights in so that the area is being lit now, so that I don't think the rescue effort is going to be hampered by the darkness. The rescue effort is hampered by the fact that there's still fire there. There are still unsound structures, and it's still dangerous, although the rescue effort is now taking place. But if you're asking me, is it hampered? It's hampered because of the conditions, not because of the nighttime.
Is there a long procession of heavy bulldozers and other heavy construction equipment making its way down to lower Manhattan? What is that going to be used for?
That's going to be used to move debris out of the way so that the emergency vehicles can get in and out quickly, so that we can get the ambulances in.